highlights steps that must be taken for Nigeria to achieve self-reliance.
With concerted efforts, Nigeria can stem the brain drain, and the initiatives to this end include investing substantially in education, research, technology, and that will create the enabling environment for growth and innovation. Also, by encouraging the implementation of competitive compensation packages and career advancement opportunities for professionals in critical sectors.
The author of the book speaks on what informed the title and urges the federal government to come up with policies that will make investments thrive.
Where you bring the best brain in diaspora in each of the sectors, economy, education, health, and all that, working with people in Nigeria to deal with the issues we have in this country. That way, we leverage on their knowledge, we leverage on their exposure, we leverage on their network and relationship. We need to build this country together as a people.
The book is then launched. The book provides questions and solutions to governance and how to better position the nation towards socio-economic development.
Indeed, the words of the former president, Olusegun Obasanjo, they sounded really heavy. And there are some who would argue, well, you were president, what did you do? And but I like the fact that he said we. In other words, I'm not out of this. I'm also part of the system. So we have disappointed Africa, we have disappointed the world. And it speaks a lot, as Kayode said, it's a sobering moment. The truth is, when you look at Nigeria as Nigerians, you might say, hello, I'm just a citizen. What's my business? There are those who opted to take up leadership positions, appointment or election, as the case may be. But every one of us has a role to play where we are. For instance, we know there are laws, simple laws, like traffic rules. Obey traffic rules. And then you go the other way, you're driving against traffic. You are flouting a part of what you're supposed to do. You're failing in your own side. Simple laws like keep your environment clean, put away your trash effectively, properly. No, you just throw it anyhow. I mean, I watched a video skit where a lady was driving and she parked and then threw trash out the window. And a young man walked up, picked up the trash, put it back in her car. Did it a couple of times and the lady came out and slapped him. Unfortunately for her, she didn't know that the guy was a senior military officer. So while she was doing all of that, she now called someone who sent a soldier, I think it was a soldier, to her to like protect her from this young man who is assaulting her. And as the soldier came there, saw that this is his boss, and then stood to attention. She was in shock. But the question is, herself, who was flouting that law of, I mean, simple human law of put away your trash effectively, and then calling a supposed friend to send someone to protect her. Herself and the guy that sent the soldier, both of them are in the wrong place. Because why do you even need to send a soldier? A soldier's place is not coming to a civil society to protect the citizens. Their job is beyond that. That's the job of the police. But simple things like that. You fail or we fail. And then we now look to the government to say the government has failed. Okay.
Well, government is still to provide leadership, Nyota. That's why they're there. I mean, yes, indeed, we all have personal roles. That's why we have families, and that's why we're taught the importance of taking initiative from a very early age. But many people do not have the luxury of families, and that's why, well, that's not why the state is there. But indeed, whenever it is that the unit of family fails, you know, society does feel the impact. Listening to the former president, Olusegun Obasanjo, you can accuse him of many things, but one thing you can never accuse him of is a lack of patriotism. It always comes through whenever it is that he speaks about this country. Same goes for President Goodluck Jonathan, who will forever be honored and cherished for the exemplary move he made during an electoral process where he suffered defeat. So these gentlemen, they've done their own part. I mean, they had the opportunity at leadership. They'll win some, they'll lose some. But on the whole, when we look at ourselves as a country, are we happy about where we are? The key, a lot of people will say, no, we're not. In fact, listening to the former president, what he was saying, President Olusegun Obasanjo, when he said that we have disappointed ourselves, we've disappointed Africa, we've disappointed the world, it read very much like a penitentiary rite. You know, that prayer that Catholics say at the beginning of Mass when you say, it's through my fault, through my own fault. So really, yes, there is a part. I mean, historians have sat through the years, you know, trying to determine what precisely has been the problem with Nigeria. Is it because we had a colonial past, or is it because our problems internal and self-inflicted? Some people will say, oh, there is, you know, a mix of the two. You cannot totally remove the fact that we had the colonial past. But some people will say, but we're not the only ones who were colonized. How come other countries with whom we started at the same line have since moved on? How come we have not been able to, you know, pick ourselves up by the bootstraps and do so much better by ourselves? I think that while we'll, you know, meditate on the past, or while we'll reflect on what has happened in the past, I think it should be with a view to moving forward. It should be with a view to, you know, doing better by ourselves, with a view to saying, well, this is where our country currently is. We're unhappy about it. What can we do to make sure that our children do not come and lament just the same way we are? You know, I think that's the question before all of us. And if indeed we are sincere, if our leaders are sincere, because you cannot take away the role of leadership, that's what they have a job of doing, to galvanize all of us from the smallest level to the highest level. That's from the local government to the federal government, to mobilize all of us to see that there is greatness in this country and we need to work to achieve it. Bukola and Coyote.
Yes, indeed, Mark. I'm glad you started on, you know, the note of leadership, you know, demanding responsibility from our leaders to play their role. And that's where I also want to pick up from, Mark, this morning. You know, leaders, government has a social contract to commit to implement whether they have kept their own side of the bargain over the years is what, you know, has a huge question mark, you know, by its side this morning. And I'm also glad, like Nyota, that the former president, you know, spoke in the third-person narrative. One of the things, or some of the things that stand out during his administration was debt forgiveness, the economic growth rate, just to mention a few. But there are also other issues that stood out during his own administration. For instance, the issue of fuel subsidy, well, had been there, we could say, before that time. You could also talk about power supply. Not quite 7 years after, our neighboring Ghana celebrated uninterrupted power supply, just 7 years after the former president's administration. So you could also say that, you know, we should ask some questions of his own administration as well. So it's a good thing that he didn't recuse himself from responsibility. So over the years, how have our leaders treated other issues, i.e. corruption? Have we made examples of particularly leaders who have been found to be culpable in malfeasance? How have we treated issues of the electoral process? You know, these are some of the things that we can review and reflect upon, you know, as we decide on how to chart the way forward for the country. Our leaders have their work cut out for them. And, of course, as you have rightly noted, the followers, too. You know, I drive down every morning, and I wonder how Nigerians do it. Why do they ignore the pedestrian bridges and they cross the dangerous expressway? If government had not made provision for that, you know, in the first place, we would have, you know, demanded accountability and responsibility of government in that regard. But Nigerians do that now and again, regardless of the city or the town that you find themselves in. You know, just to mention a few, one out of the many ways that Nigerians can also show example, you know, as followers. But let me also give Kadi an opportunity to weigh in on this.
I mean, what more can I add, really? I'm glad that we're all on the same, I believe we're all on the same page as a nation on where we think we ought to be, really, because we know we're better than this. I mean, the title of that book, Reclaiming the Jewel of Africa, speaks volumes, really. We know what we are, the potentials we have, and we know that we're not there. But while we can talk about, leadership, very, very important, I'd also like to task leadership on not just the immediate challenges we have, but on future challenges. Yes, there's the issue of subsidy removal, the economic challenges and all of that. We need to fix that. But while we're fixing that, let's also ensure that for the coming generation, or let me just say this generation, a lot of attention is paid to them. I mean, the politicians we have right now, give them 20, some at most 30 years, they will definitely be out of circulation. And then this nation will squarely be in the hands of the young people, the 18-year-olds, the 20-year-olds. What would become of this nation, the giant in the sun, as they called it then? By the way, that was a film, a documentary for northern Nigeria when it got self-government, I think, in 1959, but of course it was used for the nation as a whole. So we need to pay attention to this current generation. A lot of them have lost faith in Nigeria. That's why Japa is a big thing right now. They don't see anything good coming out of this nation, so they'd rather go to another country. I mean, I hear people say they're in Australia. Some say they're even in neighboring countries, anywhere but Nigeria. So we need to focus on that. A lot of them don't believe in hard work anymore, hard work and diligence, patriotism. They don't believe in it because they see the leaders doing all sorts and they think, well, it's worked for them, so I don't need to do all of that. So the leaders need to sit up and ensure that when they are done with whatever it is they're doing right now, which I expect should be governance, that will still have a nation that we'll all be proud of. So let's pay attention to the coming generation. We can go on, but let's take a look at the front pages, and we'll begin from, of course, Abuja in a moment. Stay with us.
And indeed, we're starting off with a look at the papers from here with The Guardian. And this story, it's quite interesting, the story they lead with. It's like painting a picture of hope in our land. It says, it's a sad one though. Made in Nigeria smartphones fumble as monthly importation hits 50 billion naira. Now, why I chose to look at the positives, even though it looks like a negative there. It says, some of the metals, a breakdown of critical metals in a smartphone. Some of these critical metals are here in this country. We have them here, and if they are properly mined and managed, I mean, we could just like it could be part of the things we export if they are not already being exported illegally, as the case would be. So that's what they lead with. You see all the metals there: touchscreen display, electronics, microphone, speakers, vibration unit, casing. Well, just look at The Guardian. It looks
well, kudos to those who are also thinking in this direction. You know, you'll make mistakes at first, but I sincerely hope that they don't give up just yet. You know, they keep working to perfect it. People can say, oh, the technology is available, why are we fumbling? But hey, you also must bear in mind that this technology, some of them or most of them are patented. If you do not have the right to, use it, you can't just go and take up somebody else's work and, claim it as yours. So let us hope that, those who are behind this will not give up, that they'll keep working at it until they eventually perfect it.
You know, some of the most admired and used smartphones around the world are actually assembled or made in a certain part of the world in Asia. But then they are a product of maybe the US, but they are made in Asia. It just speaks a lot to what the resources they have on ground, both human and material resources they have on ground. So that maybe things like that should begin to happen there, where we have some of these processing plants and plants here in Nigeria. It will help a great deal creating jobs. But let's move on now. That pink box by the right of that story, your left, says Akpabio eyes constitutional role for traditional rulers as the BAS commits to restructuring. That continues on page 5. Remember, the traditional rulers, different ones, had met with the president, and all of them have pointed to one thing: give us more roles, as in give us responsibility, work with us to make things different. So Senate President, or President of the Senate, is looking towards that, and the National Assembly generally. So go to page 5 for details. Tribunal nullifies LP candidate election, declares PDP's Elumelu winner, is on page 3. Yesterday there was a bit of rejoicing in his constituency, and those that know him calling him. I actually overheard someone talking to him whilst walking home. Then petrol subsidy, making palliatives work for the people. Go to page 12, it's an editorial, and see what that's about. But below there, Mars burial, Amnesty International tackles Lagos government on identities of NSAS victims. It goes to page 3. And then that story we had a conversation on earlier. Nigeria has failed Africa. Poorly implemented policies drive citizens to poverty. Obasanjo laments. And we will leave it there. Oh, yeah, this one. As creativity goes awry under guise of skit-making pranks. News analysis is on page 4. Interesting reads at The Guardian. That's it from The Guardian.
Well, New Telegraph is the one I'm looking at for you, and they're looking at the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal. I had PEPT ruling. Atiku Obi moved to form alliance against Tinubu APC. Atiku proposes one term to step down for Obi in 2027. Both parties will benefit from such merger. That's according to PDP chieftain. We're not discussing alliance with PDP yet. That's according to Labour Party. Tinubu APC's dubious propaganda aims to confuse Nigerians. That's according to Obi. So what the story is about, you might want to see on pages 2 and 3 of the paper. So this is what they're... Is this speculative? You don't know. I mean, because this says Atiku proposes one term to step down for Obi in 2027. Is this, if this ruling should go our way, or are they certain it's going to go their way? Or you might want to see details on pages 2 and 3 of the paper. Don't run with the headlines, please don't. Take a look at all the stories you have here. Very interesting. This one says, 2023 polls, we await reports of 161 election observers, as according to INEC. Armed personnel rigged for politicians at collation centers. That's according to CSOs. So the 2023 election is still very much on the front burner, pages 2 and 3. But the story which really caught my interest is this one. Kano football star Musa slashes fuel pump price from 620 naira to 580 naira in his filling stations. Okay, so that's somebody given personal subsidy. You can term it as that. Personally subsidizing customers who come to his filling station.
Interesting.
Yes, interesting. You might want to know the name of the filling station.
So that you drive all the way.
On page 5 of the paper. But, I mean, some people always find a way to reach out, and it's very heartwarming to see. Nigerian investors in dilemma over 234 billion naira rice import trapped in India. Okay, page 3 is where we'll see details, and FX revaluation gains will boost banks Q2 2023, that second quarter 2023 profits. We'll leave it there for New Telegraph.
And turn to the Nigerian Tribune very quickly this morning. Speaking of running, you might want to run with the headline, but the question is, will you be running alone on that one? But listen to this. How Tinubu can hold petrol pump price from hitting 1,000 naira. That's ascribed to experts. And there's a very, very instructive proposition in that regard. Say free market not synonymous with complete absence of regulation. So where's the place of regulation amid the skyrocketing price of petrol, and especially with the entry of more participants in that importation space. So how can the price of petrol be stabilized, amid all of that? Also, if you consider domestic production, which is somewhere in the offing, we believe, perhaps before the end of this month, if miracles still happen. Well, I'm just being optimistic this morning. I really don't want to buy petrol at 1,000 naira per litre. Let's take a look at other stories. Listen to this one. Under the headlines, Reps election, Tribunal sacks LPs, Okole declares Elumelu winner. There are other interesting stories under that. We'll just take about two more before we go to another one. 4 injured as 2-story building collapses in Ibadan. And lastly, from the front page of the Nigerian Tribune, Reps vow to recover over $9 billion gas flaring levy from IOCs. Others. It's a page 4 read. Question is, why is Nigeria still flaring gas in 2023? Let's leave it there for the Nigerian Tribune.
I'm sure that question is not from you, Bukola. A set-up question. We'll take a look at this Nigeria. This Nigeria is next on the lineup, and this is the lead for you. It's something really concerning. 43% of Nigerian children actively engaged in child labor, says FG. Survey shows 39% working under hazardous conditions, including armed conflicts, commercial sex exploitation.
That's really, really sad.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to take a look at this data, really. So that's essentially saying 4 out of every 10 Nigerian children are actively engaged in child labor. I think this is worth looking at, just, the data, how come, and how it was gathered, because this is, if nothing is, if this is not shocking, then I wonder what will be.
Well, Kayode, I'm somewhat glad that this is coming from the federal government, not from international organizations, not from non-governmental organizations. The question is, what's government doing about it?
Yeah, we need to definitely interrogate this, because 43% is a whole lot. It is mind-blowing. 43%. Goodness me. Well, there's a picture of the vice president attending that event in Italy, Rome, Italy. That's the big picture. And a lot of people are asking, where's the president? What's he been up to? Well, we're not quite sure, but it looks like the ministerial list should be coming out. I think Friday is the deadline. So it's important to see that ASAP. A couple more stories, really, but I'll just take this one finally. Ex-Ghanaian minister arrested after losing $1 million to domestic workers. So, yeah, I understand that same minister resigned as well after that whole $1 million cash probe, and it's just quite interesting talking point, really, about corruption, the actions of people in government, whether or not they're able to take responsibility and all of that. But we'll leave it there for this Nigeria and take a moment, but we're back with some of the biggest stories of the day. Stay with us.
In preparation for the unveiling of its legislative agenda, the 10th House of Representatives, in partnership with the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, is holding this stakeholders engagement. The idea is to collate submissions from different segments of the society to guide the House on its areas of focus.
We have outlined 6 key pillars that will serve as foundation for our legislative agenda: economic empowerment and diversification, infrastructure development, education and human capital development, healthcare for all, transparent governance and accountability, security and safety of persons and property.
The National Assembly does have a key role to play in ensuring that the challenges of living in Nigeria today is not so harsh as to force unintended consequences on the country.
For the Speaker of the House, citizens can hold lawmakers accountable as the House will operate an open National Assembly.
The House will pay priority attention to participatory budgeting process and delivery, law reform, electoral reform, women's participation and inclusion in governance, among others. Our desire is to have a legislative agenda that meets the yearnings and aspirations of citizens, and which they will use as a benchmark to evaluate and assess our performance after 4 years.
Stakeholders present make their contributions relating to the interests of sections of society they represent.
We want extra seat bills for women. And then when we get the extra seats, we'll be talking about affirmative action, about citizenship and indigenship. But the most important bill for us is the extra seats bill. I just came back from Rwanda, and I was so ashamed when we were talking about women's political participation, especially at the parliament level.
For children with disabilities, there's nothing to write home about. They cannot afford school fees. Even those that can afford, the schools, the facilities, the services are not inclusive. They are not accessible for children with disabilities.
Nigerians look forward to the legislative agenda of the House, which is a working document with which the lawmakers will be held to account, especially considering the current living condition in the country. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
And engage with stakeholders to create an environment.
And that's where we started from, looking at the legislative agenda of the House of Representatives. 6 items put out: the economic empowerment and diversification, infrastructure development, education and human capital development, health for all, transparent governance, accountability, security and safety of persons and property. Well, to help us break it down, we have here in our studio, in the Abuja studio, Professor Jideofor Adibe, who is a professor of political science and international relations, Nasarawa State University. He also happens to be an extraordinary professor of government studies, Northwest Mafikong University, South Africa, and the founder of Adnis and Abe Publishers. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And joining us virtually is Austin Aigbe, who's a member of the International Public Service Association, IPSA. He's also an alumni of Africa Leadership Forum, alumni Global Social Change Leadership Institute, New York, and he joins us virtually. Thank you, Mr. Aigbe, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Morning. Let's start with you, Professor Adibe. When you get this list, when you look at this agenda set by the House of Representatives, as these are the areas they're going to focus their legislative actions on, what does that say to you?
Well, I think they were more like trying to talk to the public mood, because otherwise it sounded more like a manifesto from a political party. Remember, their own intervention can only come through bills. They don't really have, and even that bills, they share that legislative capacity with the Senate. So when they are talking about, for example, health care for all, as if they are going, or they have the capacity or the, constitutional competence to decide on what Nigerians will have with respect to health care, it tends to be, it can be understood in terms of trying to play to the mood of the nation. But otherwise, it normally will start, when you talk about legislative agenda, this is the fulcrum, the framework that will guide the work of the legislature, the House of Reps, throughout the entire 10th Assembly. It will usually start with a needs assessment. You do needs assessment and take members through the entire legislative process, a kind of orientation. It often reads like a course outline. And then you can, for example, when you're talking about health care for all, are you telling people you are giving them free health care? There are extant laws in the field, like Nigerian Health Development Authority Act of 2021. So you, under laws you are going to revise, you can put revisiting the healthcare something, because that's only the way you can make intervention. In that way, it becomes much more streamlined. But as I said, they probably are deliberately talking to the mood of the country.
Which some people will say it's not a bad idea, considering how they already started.
Yes.
I mean, some of the approvals that were already given and the questions around the 70 billion naira approved for the National Assembly. Well, initially it was it working conditions, to improve the working conditions of members, and people have asked for a breakdown of that. Yeah. But we saw yesterday that the House not only had this engagement, you know, which I think was facilitated by a number of support groups. For instance, PLAC, which we know, you know, also helps a great deal in, you know, helping the National Assembly in some advisory capacity, and, you know, in the building capacity. We also saw the Speaker of the House of Representatives yesterday intervene in a planned action by doctors, National Association of Resident Doctors, to go on strike. And we saw, you know, the Speaker engaging there. So some people will say maybe, you know, their intervention primarily should be through bills. But with those sort of engagements, that I mean, that, like the type we saw with the doctors, do you think that they can effect much more or exert much more influence on the executive, considering the roles they are hoping to play as well?
Yes, you're right. Even though the legislature primarily, you know, theoretically makes law, it also has executive functions through oversight and through the idea that he can invite people, you know, summon you to the National Assembly to ask for certain questions. But other than that, unless you can also use your influence, you know, to interface, you know, in the case of the doctors you mentioned, or informally make an input in bills coming from the executives or the one coming from members. But as I said, it's more like, coming back to what you said about the 70 billion, I know Nigerians were, yes, it's part of the high cost of government, but I also think that we tend to exaggerate that. The National Assembly is a huge bureaucracy. Within that, for example, you have National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies. Is a big institution. There are several institutions within the National Assembly. When these are disaggregated, it's probably easier to understand. But I'm not saying it's justified, but it's just that once we hear billions, we go gaga, you know, especially remember that former President Olusegun Obasanjo had accused them of corruption. Sanusi said 25% of national resources go into funding the National Assembly. So all these are part of it. But when you disaggregate it, plus the fact of our own cultural environment in the sense that if you invite a speaker here to give a lecture, and then when he's leaving, Speaker of the House, and he doesn't drop an envelope, you feel he's a wicked man. So you take it down the village. It's only in our own climb, for example, that you invite members of the legislature or even the executive, and you expect them to pay tax wherever they go, from the gate man throughout that. I think these are the things, some of the things they factor in.
Maybe it's a
well, well, Prof, I don't know if you've seen the breakdown of that money. People will say,
no, I'm not saying it's justified.
The major quarrel I think a lot of Nigerians have with it is that they don't even know what it's for. You ask, you know, even lawmakers themselves, newly elected lawmakers. So this 70 billion, is this, you know, is this why you opted to come and serve your people in court? And they tell you, oh, well, they give you a number of reasons, but oftentimes the reasons we have found have been disjointed in terms of the responses that they've given. A lot of them will tell you behind the scenes that they haven't seen it. They don't even know what the breakdown is for. They don't know if any money is supposed to come to them. They don't know whether members, as individual members, are getting it, or whether this is going to the Service Commission. They have no idea.
Because of the bureaucracy, it's not even one bureaucracy. So
isn't it important that when the National Assembly is talking about engaging Nigerians, one of the primary things that Nigerians would like to see, you know, one of the things that they should prioritize should be transparency?
I agree absolutely with you, and I'm not defending that 70 billion because from that to executive, the other day we read that 61 million was budgeted in Lagos State, for example, for mass burial of 103 casualties from the NSAS, which breaks down to about 500,000. So you ask yourself, what kind of mass burial gives 500,000? There are suspicions and impunities across the country. But what I'm saying is that given the suspicion and distrust of the government, whenever you mention anything in billions, Nigerians don't want to. I mean, we just believe it's part of the story.
Okay, Mr. Adibe, let's bring this to you. The conversation's been about this agenda, and the question for one who is part of a leadership institution.
That's Mr. Aigbe.
Mr. Aigbe, rather. Mr. Aigbe, one who's been a part of a leadership institution, one would think that, I mean, borrowing from Prof's words, as though they are speaking to the people, as though it's a manifesto, instead of looking at how to focus on their legislative duties. They are now like putting out a manifesto, which at the same time happens to be like a guiding framework for their work. What's your perspective when it comes to this agenda that the House of Reps has put forward?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. First, I'd like to state without equivocation that what the rep has done, apparently, well, let me give credence to Clark. Clark has always worked with National Assembly to ensure some very concrete agenda for engagement. So we can, by the end of this tenure in 4 years, we can then come back to interrogate all of this 6-point agenda. But I'm worried. I'm worried because it seems as if the National Assembly, particularly the House of Representatives, is playing the role of an executive. When you set agendas like this, what it means is that people are going to expect that you create a state of Eldorado in the state of Nigeria. What that means is that people will expect that by tomorrow, our educational system will be okay. People will expect that tomorrow, security of life will be okay, and all eyes will be on the House of Representatives. What this means is that as we try to reduce the pressure on the National Assembly from playing executive functions in a way that remove them from attack from citizenry, in a way that put them in their legislative format, so to say, this kind of agenda can be misinterpreted by the generality of Nigeria to reflect executive delivery, education, health for all, like Professor Dua said. When you say health for all, what does that mean? I would have expected that Professor Yomiri, whom I respect very well, a strong comrade, would have broken down those agenda more to the point of legislative functions, rather than just leaving it the way it did, even though he also said we're going to pass law. There was a commentary in the course of his speech. He said that's to pass law. But after making that commentary, breaking it down into particular legislative function was missing, in my opinion. However, when the speaker came up, the speaker was direct. Legislative action on electoral reform, action on inclusion, women and persons with disability and youth, those became a bit concrete. So let me flip it around. What are the functions of the legislature? One will expect by now that with the hike in fuel prices, the legislative arm, particularly the House of Reps, which is the House of the people. The House of Reps is the House of the people, while the Senate is the House of Equality. So the House of Reps is the one who understands the pains of the people more. Part of legislative function is to interrogate issues that impact on people negatively. One would have expected by now that the House of Representatives would have nipped in the bud the corruption in the system of subsidy. Again, people have argued that in any case, that you can actually say that there is no subsidy. After all, when the interrogation of fuel started by the time former President Muhammadu Buhari was going to exit power, He had planned for the removal, the total removal of subsidy. And one of the arguments was that if you remove this subsidy, fuel prices was going to jack up to about 300 naira. 300 naira from the 196 or 197 or 198 depending. Suddenly, the subsidy was not removed. It did not just move to 300 or 350 or 400. It jacked up to about 500. And within a month, we were already running into 600 and something. You are going to ask, the National Assembly has not interrogated to halt the price, to say, no, executive, we have a legislative function, we represent the people, we cannot allow this burden on the people. That is legislative action. Interfering in health, doctors and all of that is good. It's good. But you would have made better laws if there are salary issues. You make laws that nip in the bud those challenges. Like I said, part of your function as legislative arm is to check what they call scrutiny. Have they scrutinized the subsidy? Have they scrutinized the high cost of living in Nigeria? Have they tried to look at the PPP? Or when we talk about the 70 billion, you know, I love when Professor Jideofor was trying to put all of those institutions in perspective, but we know what 70 billion was for. It was to ease legislative action. And we have had that time and again. We know what that means. Every new parliament receive new money. So this is one of the introduction. You are welcome to Parliament.
Mr. Igwe, if I may come in here, I mean, you've talked about how this agenda could be misinterpreted, all 6 of them. But we also know, because you've talked about how the House of Representatives is the people's house. Some people will also remind us that the House of Representatives also holds the power of the purse. They are the house for appropriation. Yes, they share that power with the Senate, but some people will say that primarily that's one of their key functions. So when they set out an agenda like this, don't you think that it would also help them focus whenever it is they have a budget to look at, that some of these are some of the key areas that they will be looking at to ensure that these areas are well funded and the aims of government, especially the executive arm of government, are achieved in that regard?
Thank you. So when you say aims of executive arm of government, so you need to align with the executive arm of government and have a conversation with the executive arm of government to say what is the plan, have a seat with them, then pull up those agenda and check where you fit in. Otherwise, the challenge will be expectation of people going to deliver all of these atomized agendas. And I'm saying it is very unrealistic if the executive propose 5% of budget to education and the National Assembly, particularly the House of Representatives, then allocate 25%. And you are saying, maybe the executive is saying, well, we are sorry, you just allocated 25%, we don't have the money. Automatically, the House of Representatives would have paid in that agenda. Or you're talking about insecurity. Let's fund the military. Let's fund the police. And the executive is saying we don't have the money. So the alternative is to go borrow. And Nigerians would then shout, borrow again? We just keep borrowing and borrowing. People will not understand that you need to borrow for some sustainability of government actions. But because it's always, the flag is loans, and the National Assembly is quick to approve. You see, what you remember what happened before former President Buhari left office. Just before leaving office, some huge amount of money were approved by the National Assembly, and people shouted. But to date, there was nobody interrogated what the money was used for. These are the things I'm talking about. The burden on the Parliament must not be the burden of executive. They are so different. They play different rules. One ensures that whatever the executive plans to do, it does it effectively, and that's the legislative government. If the plan of the executive were, maybe just to put it, the current administration during his campaign, I said they were going to remove subsidy. So it's not new that subsidy was removed on the very first day of work It wasn't new, but what was new is the burden that came with it. And that is a role of the parliament to say, what can we do? Can we put on systems in place that help to reduce this burden so that people, the number of poverty, which people argue we are going to take out of, we kept arguing, we are pulling 100 million out of poverty.
Interesting, Austin. I mean, you talk about how the legislative arm of government is not an executive arm of government, yet you still say that, oh, maybe they can look at systems that they can put in place to ease the burden. And some people say, what role are they going to play? But let me come to Prof in the studios. Oh, you've heard him in terms of the confusion that could arise. I don't know if you agree with him that this should have been done in tandem with the executive arm of government. But some people also say that if the House of Representatives is the house of the people and they are really close to the people, if the executive arm of government is not looking in this direction, don't they have a duty to call the executive arm of government to say, we think this is the place where you should, be looking at to have more effect on, for the people to feel the true impact of government or governance on themselves?
Well, if they do that, we wouldn't know. That would be very informal. Because in theory, there should be separation of functions. But let me just say one thing. What I thought they could have done when they talk about education, one of the, do I use the word palliative? Is a negative, it has negative connotation. One of the measures the government took amid criticisms of the way it almost simultaneously removed subsidy and floated the exchange rate. Because it's not just the subsidy. If it was only removing the subsidy, it probably would not have been as calamitous. But you remove subsidy, you float your exchange rate. So inflationary pressures are going to go to the sky. And you don't have anything you're selling that will bring you that foreign exchange to bring it down. You're dependent on oil. So where is the supply side? Well, that's another thing. I think one of the things they could have done, the government talked about education loan as a preparatory ground probably for hiking up school fees. Now, the part of the agenda could be to, have a second look at that loan scheme, student loan scheme, because it's not implementable. It started, I think, 2021. And it doesn't seem there was robust thinking that went into it when the president signed it. For example, it says for you to qualify, your household will not be any more than 500,000 per annum. If you're, a household now if you decide that it is just a man and a husband, it means you are not...
Man and a wife.
A man and a wife. I'm not going to... and it means that you are not supposed to earn more than 41,000 naira, 41,400 or thereabout per month. That is 20-something thousand. At the same time, that requires that before you qualify, you bring your tax clearance certificate. The truth is that at that threshold, you are tax exempt. And then you are supposed to get somebody who is a lawyer or somebody who has property to guarantee. Who will guarantee somebody earning such minimum small amount of money? So nobody can access it. So if you really want to talk about loan scheme, you can put it in the perspective as part of the agenda because it's just been signed. So the president just assented to it. So you just say to review. And then we'll know it is targeted at a particular thing because the whole idea of education is too broad. So I agree with my brother, Austin. It's more like, as I said, trying to talk to the needs of the people. Now we will do this, we will do that. As Mario Como will remind us in the U.S., politicians, they talk in poetry, they campaign in poetry. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, they have to do it in prose.
Well, let's take this conversation. I'm sure that our colleagues in Lagos will also like to get in. But just before we do, looking at some of the things that were also discussed yesterday, I mean, the fact that citizens also brought some of their own agenda to the National Assembly. I think that was very interesting to see. People living with disabilities, women, of course, bringing their own agenda as well. How do you think that the National Assembly can truly incorporate some of the yearnings Because I'm sure those people, I don't want to believe that they were just invited for decoration. I imagine that they truly want to see how they can incorporate some of the things that, you know, citizens are saying, some of the things that people have advocated for years, how they can bring these matters on board and truly make them into laws that are implementable. Because we've also seen in recent times people moving bills that even other colleagues have said, no, while this is well-intentioned, it will not work in implementing it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, first of all, the National Assembly has to do something about its image. Yes, there's a suspected corruption, just is a reflection of the Nigerian society itself. It cannot be seen in isolation of what's happening in other places. But it's got a very bad image. And I think it started from the time Obasanjo, you know, came hard upon them as being very corrupt. And then Sanusi, former Central Bank Governor, Mayor of Kano, you know, came up and said 25% of resources and budget are spent on them. Of course, we don't know what percentage is spent on the executive. They need to go that offensive and do things like sacrifice. For example, they can, you know, corporate social responsibility. Some of them can really do things that are good for optics in order to win the trust of Nigerians. But having said this, there is a low trust, a huge distrust of government. And when you talk about government, you are not talking about just the executive. It is also the judiciary, and it is the legislature. Fortunately or unfortunately, the history of democracy is the history of the legislature. Because even under military rule, you have the other arms of government in operation. It is only when you have a civilian dispensation that the legislature comes in. And if you follow the history of democracy itself, you see it's the history of legislature. So I think it's very important, but I think the legislature, they need to do something to redeem their image.
When you say redeem their image, where would you want them to start? Because one would think that these things they put out here are pointers to what they're going to do. It's about the people now, so we need to legislate around transparent governance and accountability.
There are existing legislations there. That's what I'm saying.
Would it be,
for example,
a revisiting those legislation?
If you, for example, focus on a particular, okay, for example, you under the legislative agenda, when you start, you know, itemizing your legislative, it starts with needs assessment, and then we'll come down to the legislations you plan. Don't forget, you have 469 members or so, and the Senate will come. And the executive will bring their own bill. So it's not just, but you focus it, you do intervention. And then, you know, the informal engagement with the government is not done outside the purview of the public. But we know they should be doing things like that. And I'm not so happy, let me put it, the way the legislative agenda was couched. As my brother Austin said, it's more like you are appropriating the functions of the executive. And this is not the best time for anybody to be seen and trying to appropriate the functions of the executive.
Professor Adibe, as you said, the couching of this agenda speaks as though they are appropriating the functions of the executive. But maybe they're also looking at how to get it all going, hit the ground running, which is a common phrase that we're now using in this government. But Mr. Aigbe, Prof. Adibe has talked about a needs assessment. Is it possible that the legislature, the House of Reps, had already done their own kind of needs assessment individually, each legislator doing that on his own, and then they come together and bring out this agenda, all to serve the people that they represent? Is it possible?
Thanks. Just before I speak about the possibility, let me quickly respond to Maobe's response. So when I talk about a system, the function of parliament is to make good laws or laws for the good governance of the state. When you make laws, you actually create a system. Now, that is what I was talking about, system. They make laws that the executive fit into. Talking about research or a survey or study, I'm aware too that PLAC did some form of supported orientation system with the National Assembly. Probably there would have been some needs assessment gotten from that session. How be it? How be it? These are what Nigerians are saying, and you have collected it. It is almost a given that if you run with it, it becomes a standalone function. Government works as a system. It is the executive, like Prof said, the parliament, the legislature, and the judiciary. But most of the time, oftentimes, we tend to sideline the judiciary from the administration of government because we see it as they haven't gone for elections. So the ones that went for elections are the ones who should decide the affairs of the country. When you have a legislative agenda that looks more like an executive function, it's an executive function. The executive will implement them. Implementation, we have to, because the allocation of the scarce resources isn't from Parliament. Parliament can't move money around. Like I said just now, we have had issues about padding the budget and all of the controversy that came after with it. When you have made needs, we have created those, you have spoken to your constituents, and these are the priority area. Education, security. Everybody knows that everything the Parliament determines is on the front burner for development in our nation. But if the Parliament says, I ask the question now, if the Parliament says they want to allocate 10% of country's budget to education, can they do it? If they end up doing it during budget processes, which is part of their responsibility, to allocate, to check the budget and do all of those rituals that they usually do during budgetary processes, and you move money from, let's say, infrastructure, and you move it over to education. And the executive said, no, we are sorry, we can't do it. What can Parliament do? Will they go ahead to impeach, begin the process of impeachment? Those are the questions. We know that's unrealistic.
No, Ms. Adibe, Ms. Adibe, if I may come in there, you know that thing of what can Parliament do when they pass a resolution and the executive fails to implement or follow through with that resolution. That's an argument that's been going on, and many feel that the legislature is not given its due. Many times they do their resolutions and the executive practically ignores the resolutions that the House has or the National Assembly has passed. But we'll look at this when we come back from this break. Do stay with us.
Welcome back, Professor Jideofor Adibe and Mr. Osinaigbe, still with us on this all-important conversation around the legislative agenda for the National Assembly. And let me go to Mr. Igbe on this one. And I want to follow up on something Professor Adibe said earlier on about the expectations of Nigerians, or some Nigerians, from members of the National Assembly. I mean, they see them, they request for maybe monies and all of that from them. And I want you to help us know if it's possible to really have a House of the People in reality, not just on paper, in spite of all of this? Because, again, a lot of people see politicians as money bags. So naturally, instead of requesting for, legislative actions, things, fixing the laws, they'd rather just ask for money or expect money from the legislature. So how can we begin to reverse this? Because whatever agenda they're meant to have should be a reflection of the yearnings of the people, the average Nigerian. But if the yearnings of the average Nigerian is, give me something to hold on to, money for food, which of course you understand because there's a lot of poverty. So how do we begin to reverse that to make the House really the House of the people?
Thanks. This question we have interrogated before, even on your program, but just to re-echo it, Professor Adibe said the National Assembly need to find a way to redeem its image. The word redeem its image is a challenge, and it's a huge challenge. It began from the process of the campaign, and when Parliament asking for a vote from the people, they promised executive function, they promised healthcare, they promised education. They campaign as if they are going to provide or going to be playing executive roles. So it's part of this, it's a snowball of this campaign that I'm sure that has led to this agenda. Again, rather than try to put on the table or create a scenario to let people know we are going to ensure that the executive deliver on its promises, because this current regime does have an agenda. The president does have an agenda. Parliament's role is to ensure that this agenda meets the people's demand. In any case, every politician wants to speak to the people's yearnings. So even the government, even the president, during his campaign, made those promises. The echo of those, this sentiment, security, it was top of the agenda. What the Parliament could now do is to ensure that the people see that they are pursuing the executive to deliver on these promises. Removing of making them the House of Parliament, the corruption in the system does make it almost a great challenge for Parliament to totally remove themselves from this conversation we're talking about. For this to happen, it's going to take a while. Parliament must, as much as possible, put an agenda that is so legislative and not executive. By the time this regime is over, are we going to interrogate the regime based on what they do to check, to scrutinize government, based on what they did to challenge government work, because that is part of their duty? Are we going to interrogate them based on their oversight function? I don't think so. We are going to interrogate them based on the 6-point agenda they proposed, and that means we are interrogating them on executive trajectory. That is my challenge. Right. Rather than deal with the legislative functions, we are going to now deal with the legislature as an executive, and that is the bane of the legislative job. And that is why when they campaign in 2027, you are going to see how they are going to tell people how they provided education. They're going to tell they say they provided healthcare for all. Don't fit into the executive by their legislative agenda. And that is what will further widen the gap. In any case, what is politics? Politics is the allocation of scarce resources. Right. People know with the word 70 billion, the moment people know about 70 billion, they know that Parliament has money. When you come home, you should bring the 70 billion home. Because again, of Peter Oke's philosophy, the primordial and the civic culture that has further widened the scope of corruption in our nation. And until we close that gap, this will continue to happen. It is not just for parliamentarians. All right, it includes you and I.
Let me. Interesting points you have made, and let me take this to Professor Adibe now in our Abuja studio. I mean, it just hits home when you say people will ask, "Where is the 70 billion? Bring it home." But Professor Adibe, you began by talking about how people have perhaps the wrong expectations from members of the National Assembly, and these expectations naturally would push them, the National Assembly members, to seek funds in different ways so that they can meet the expectations of the people wrongly in any case. So I'd like you to drive it down. So whose responsibility is it? Because Mr. Igbe talked about closing that gap. So who is meant to essentially ensure that the right expectations are sought and stood by and eventually gotten from the legislators? Is this squarely at the table of the people? Because I imagine if the people don't then ask again for, money for weddings, money for feeding from legislators, and they ask instead that these and all that should be done in our community, these laws should be put in place, then I imagine that the legislators will have no choice than to do right by the people. So who should champion this? I'm essentially rephrasing the question for Mr. Igbe for you now.
Okay, thank you very much. What we call dash, what is gift or dash call is part of our culture. So it operates within an environment, which means that we cannot completely divorce what the legislature does from what exists in the environment. For example, if you go there, you can't expect a member of the legislature, to go to a certain function and not be announced as an important member. And if people there, whether church or mosque, will realize that a potential good donor is available, will remember what to, one project or the other. But having said it, my own beef with the legislative agenda was the way it was couched, the way it was framed, not in terms of bills and interventions, but more as if it is an executive arm of government. That's one thing I believe. But we should also start lowering expectations, me, you, and everybody. And they could have done that by, first of all, as I say, they may be playing to the times. The times are difficult. They need to give hope to people. But probably if they had been a little more specific in certain areas, I gave an example with education. Say, for example, good governance. And there are extant laws on several aspects of good governance. Electoral Act 2022, which made some nice provisions, additions, and which, from what happened in the elections, we see there are also areas that need to be plugged. If they had done things like that, it would have been very specific and people would know the areas to hold them. But playing on generalities, on the expectations has a way, you can give people hope. But, strictly speaking, is not what people expect. Let me mention one thing that also, when we tend to think of this legislature, judiciary, and executive in strictly compartmentalized manner. Yes, executive implements the laws, but they also make laws. The president can make law through what we call executive orders. The legislature, even itself, has executive functions through, for example, legislative oversight and public hearings. Even the judiciary, which should be interpreting the law, also makes laws through what the doctrine of judicial precedence. So when we are trying to look at this thing, we also look at them as bodies that have overlapping functions, but which we expect to maintain some level of independence in order for people to believe that they are checkmating the excesses from one another. So when the legislature, and that's answering directly your question, how can they come around to lower expectation? When the legislature gets too chummy with the executive, people now start to see them as a rubber stamp and that they are just there for their pockets. But when they are able to maintain, at least for optics sake, a level of detachment, seeing, for example, that they can be critical of executive bills, they don't need to be antagonistic. They could be able to be critical so that people will know, yes, there's a level of independence. And when there are independence, people believe that, well, since we are independent of each other, you won't allow the other arm to steal too much because, you are keeping an eye over each other. But when it is seen in the public that you are no longer keeping an eye on one another, that you become one and the same, it increases more of the distrust in governments. You see, for example, one of the measures the president did, I think, was it 30 billion for the judiciary, and People were giving it different interpretations. This is the kind of thing we need to do. That if, for example, there's the removal of fuel subsidy, okay, we know that the appropriation by the Buhari government it was meant to last until the end of June. So will it have made a difference if the legislature, or at least an arm of the legislature, raises some kind of questions? But in our own environment, we are often the members of the legislature who depend on the goodwill of the executive because they have the money. It tends to be more difficult. But this is one of the things we want to see, that you can show that you are independent even though you are also working collaboratively.
And as a quick follow-up to Kade's question, one of the items on this agenda is economic empowerment and diversification. In order for this, legislature to demonstrate, a commitment to redeeming itself, as you said earlier, Professor Adibe, would it still be paying lip service to this item on the agenda if it continues with its economic empowerment programs, where we see the distribution of grinding machines, motorcycles, hair dryers? Should there be, something more ambitious that, the legislators can look forward to making provision for their constituents that would depart from this, and it will cause us to begin to see them as truly walking the talk in terms of economic diversification?
I think I'll take your question a little bit away from the way you asked it. The legislature has a very good opportunity, for example, as we are talking about palliatives now. We were told the humanitarian ministry was created in 2019. And no, it's been existing for 4 years. And we were told that every year they were giving 500 billion. So the legislature has the power now to invite the ministry to provide its own impact assessment. It has now run this intervention over a 4-year period. So it is the outcome of your impact assessment that will determine how future palliatives will be distributed or targeted. Meanwhile, I don't believe in that palliative. I believe more like in macroeconomic intervention, provide a better macroeconomic environment, because what you are doing with such is to remove subsidy from one item that, cascades through the entire value chain. You remove it from fuel and you move it to another form of subsidy. I don't see the economic sense in it, personally speaking. I think it will have better use in other ways. But coming back to your question, they have the opportunity now to ask critical questions. They have the opportunity now to tap into the public mood to ask, let's interrogate the register used. Is this really the best? And then come up with a kind of an alternative legislation.
And Professor Adibe, sorry to, butting there. I wonder if they have asked critical questions, particularly where palliatives are concerned. You said earlier that, sadly, their responsibilities are restricted to lawmaking, bills, though they have the opportunity also for oversight, but they also have the will, the powers to raise motions of urgent national importance and convene to deliberate on matters that have national coverage. Let me now come to you with that, Mr. Igbe. Have we seen them demonstrate that opportunity through the interventions raised by certain lawmakers with motions to deliberate on palliatives that are going to be administered by state governors? Have we seen them also demonstrate that power, through the rejection of the motion to suspend the increase in the pump price of petrol? Mr. Igbe.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think I just responded to that earlier when I talked about the responsibility, among others, is to challenge the work of government, to interrogate issues of the moment, particularly issues of the day. Right now, the issue of today is the suffering of the Nigerian people. As a house of the people, they should stay with the people for as long as the reversal is done. They should stay with reducing the burden. Passing the burden of corruption on the people is unfair. Professor Adibe just talked about moving one palliative to another. It is not sustainable. What is sustainable is general good. Ensure that the roads are safe. Ensure that people can go to their farms. Ensure that food production is high. We are gradually leading to food security, insecurity as it were. Now, those should focus on the issues of the moment. When people are unable to go to their farms and bring our own food from our own farms, we are likely going to rely on foreign food. And each time we rely on foreign food, we are seeing our money up and inflation goes up. That should be the focus of the House of the People.
Mr. Igbe, if they have missed the opportunity to ask those critical questions, with the rejection of the motion on suspending fuel subsidy and, the rejection of the motion on, consideration of the administration of the palliatives, can we consider this document as, mere theory and, without seeing any ambition, from the National Assembly to implement it in the future?
You're very right. You're correct. And that's part of my conversation about if the executive refuse to do what the parliament is saying, what happens next? Obviously, it's almost like a non-entity. I'm asking that for you to progress with your agenda, sit with the authority that will implement those agendas. They are important. They are synchronous, and they are very key to this implementation of this item on the screen. The National Assembly, though Professor Adibe has said they perform some executive function like oversight, yes, you can call it an executive function, but I would distance myself from it being called an executive function. When part of the function of the executive is to make sure that if government says they will build 500 houses, oversight means evaluation. Have you built the 500 houses? Does it meet the standard you said you were going to do? The executive, if eventually the executive refuse or are unable to build the 500 houses, can the legislative arm go ahead to build it? No. No. They can only shout in the parliament and move all of those motions. Even we have seen in our country instances where motions that are very people sensitive are not even considered by the executive. What next needs to be done is to invoke the real power of the executive that says that if you are not in tandem with what you are expected to do for the people, then we apply the necessary measure, and one of those measures will be impeachment procedures, and then the executive will sit up and do the job appropriately. But in this case, it's going to be very difficult. All right. That you move the law that flies. And there is no law that says that if the executive undermines those resolutions, because those resolutions are not laws. Resolutions are not laws. Resolutions are mere advisories. Even the lawmaking, Professor David said about the executive order, while it's a form of law, it doesn't have the force of law. I can go to court and stop that executive bill because it is wrong. At this time, the palliative does not fit into lawmaking. It is legislative function to approve the spendings of government.
All right, Mr. Igbe, let me come in here as we wind down. It's been quite a robust conversation, really. I love the fact that we're raising these issues. At least the legislators would not say they missed this opportunity of this conversation. But let me take this to Professor Adibe in our Abuja studio and just bring in this dimension. Yes, we've talked about the agenda, the expectations and all that, but the makeup of the National Assembly itself, seeing that we have, over 7 parties represented, at least at the House of Representatives, which is, for a lot of people, a record anyway. Does that color, I choose to call it color, is it a blessing or otherwise for the National Assembly to achieve this agenda? I mean, does it take away from just having 2 and at least you know your focus. You're either on this side or this side, but then some say it increases all of the horse tradings, the the usual politicking. But for you, what do you think?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. You also have to put in environmental variables, which is that more likely than not, before the end of next year, or even this year, you might see some people crossing over to, to where the bread is buttered. But ordinarily, it should be a good thing because, as you say, different colors will provide more varieties. But given the fact that in our own environment, where the institutions are weak, what you have is the rule of the strong man. The president, controls the purse, in reality, despite what the law says. So quite often you see that you start seeing a carpet crossing, which, really should be alien to a presidential system of government. People are going to move to where they think the bread will be better buttered. But we saw that with the run-up to the selection of the Speaker of the House of Reps and the Senate President. It's congealed into, two options, those standing with the option of the President and those who are opposed. And you see in the Senate, those where it was a secret vote, those against the President had a better outing than when it was a show of hand and indicate who we are supporting, and everybody knows who we are supporting, and nobody wants to stick out his neck to be seen as opposing the man of the moment, a man of power. So these are some of the environmental variables that we have to take into consideration when we're looking at options like this. Theoretically, it's a good thing. The more, the merrier.
Okay, Professor Adibe. We're winding down now.
Okay, thank you.
So if you have like 2 seconds to give a word of advice to the House of Reps, what would that be?
Well, I would say that the House, for some reasons, it has a very bad image. And I believe the entire institution of government, there's a huge distrust of government. For some reason, maybe because of your sheer number, they are picking on the members, sometimes unfairly, in my own opinion. Because whatever impunity or atrocity or corruption that you see in the National Assembly pervades also the other two arms of governments, even more so. And they tend to have a better image. I'm not sure if they do have better image, but we complain of corruption in the executive, corruption in the judiciary. So expectedly, there's also corruption in the National Assembly. Redeem your image. That will be my advice.
Mr. Agbe, in 3 seconds, if you can.
Quick one, I do align with Barrister Ebere Fendu's proposal of a legislative agenda that supports inclusive government in our country, and also with lawyers who propose those positions with persons with disability. And of course, young people need to be brought on board. We need to use our diverse nature of state and not waste our energy. Right. We have huge resources. The National Assembly can't tap on those huge resources to make life better for all Nigerians.
All right, thank you very much. We've been speaking with Austin Aigbe, member, International Public Service Association, alumni of the Africa Leadership Forum, and alumni Global Social Change Leadership Institute, who joined us virtually. Thank you for coming in. And we had Professor Jideofor Adibe, Extraordinary Professor of Government Studies, Northwest Mafikong, South Africa, Professor of Political Science and International Relations, Nasarawa State University. Thank you for coming in as well.
Thank you.
Sunrise Daily will be back in a moment. Just stay with us.
The Duchess International Hospital caters to every aspect of the family's health needs. A one-stop shop for maternity and child health services, emergency medicine and critical care, medical and surgical subspecialties, dental and eye care, and a range of other subspecialties and services, all available at a single location right here in the heart of Ikeja. And it really doesn't matter if you're paying out of pocket using your HMO or private insurance. We focus completely on providing that world-class affordable healthcare for all the family at all times.
heartburn and indigestion? Try Gestede. My recommendation for the past 26 years, Gestede. Reliable remedy for heartburn, indigestion, flatulence, and acidity.
INEC Chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, arrives at Conference Hall for a meeting with the representatives of the Domestic Elections Observer Groups accredited to monitor the 2023 general elections. This is the first time that the INEC Chairman is holding a public meeting with members of the Domestic Elections Observer Groups since the conclusion of the 2023 general elections 4 months ago. The meeting is organized by INEC to review the conduct of that election. The INEC chairman begins the conversations by listing challenges that impacted on the outcome of the 2023 general elections.
As we are aware, there are many challenges encountered before and during the elections. The severe cash and fuel situations were compounded by the perennial insecurity nationwide. Their impact on our deployment plans, compounded by the behavior of some of our own officials in the field, made logistics management particularly challenging. While voter accreditation using the bimodal voter accreditation system was very successful, the uploading of results to the INEC result viewing portal, the IREV, especially for the presidential election, encountered a glitch as explained in our statement on the 26th of February 2023.
While appreciating the electoral umpire for organizing the meeting, members of the observer groups demand that the INEC chairman gives more detailed information about some of the challenges he listed in his presentation, such as the inability of INEC to transmit results in real time on the day of the presidential election.
In your speech, you indicted and recognized the role of some INEC staff that they played in undermining this election. That is a very welcome development. We're looking forward to the prosecution of these INEC staff that have been indicted. I want to also reiterate the fact that we truly need to know what happened with IREV for the presidential election without really going into what is already in the court.
INEC had accredited 190 domestic elections observer groups and 38 foreign observer missions to monitor the company conduct of the 2023 general elections. INEC says the post-election reports from these groups are critical for further electoral reforms.
Welcome back, and now we're swinging our attention to the 2023 election, post-2023 general elections. INEC has had conversations with different teams that he worked with for that elections to review what was done, what wasn't done, what lessons could be learned, and the plans for the next elections. Well, here in the studio we have Mr. Ne Obi, who is the immediate past convener of the Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room, in our Abuja studio. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So we'll start off from this point here. The last time the civil society organization sat down to have a conversation around the elections, INEC wasn't there. You were quoted as saying the chairman of INEC needs to apologize to Nigerians. But it was as if the civil society organizations themselves were not organized, because your colleague immediately stood up to say, no, that is your opinion. I mean, please just help us understand what was happening there.
Thank you very much for that. The last time we had the conversation, we have had a series of conversations after that. But the last time was that of when I was handing over, when we had an election, you know, and I handed over to YZ Yao, you know, who is now the convener for the Nigerian Civil Society Situation Room. We are quite organized. That's a very formidable force. And we have a steering committee, and then we have the General House. We have partners as well across the country, across the 36 states, plus the FCT. And, you know, after
speaking, I addressed because that was like valedictory, I was addressing the team because of what we have been through in the 2023 general election, the post-elections, before the election, 2 years to the election, everybody worked so hard, including the media. You were all there working from, all the other off-cycle elections that led us to believe and even trust in the technology that came up later. And so when I asked the INEC chairman, INEC was actually there. INEC was there. Festus was there full-time, throughout that meeting and watched the election. In fact, he was part of those, who controlled the election for the Situation Room. And so it wasn't that I said that behind. If you were the one, having gone through the election, having committed yourself step by step, we worked with INEC tirelessly. We committed to INEC. We believed in INEC. I think that is one time that you have civil society organizations really working and not disagreeing, they're hitting each other, but rather believing because of our common goal. Because all we are working towards is for a better Nigeria. For me, I'm the country director of ActionAid. We work on poverty eradication. How else are you able to change governance? You are looking at issues at a time when you have about 140 million Nigerians living in multidimensional poverty. And so, election is one of the hopes for the people because we are looking at the credibility of leaders who are coming in. We are asking our team to go to the field, to go out there. We are, announcing to civil society, we are announcing to Nigerians, craving their indulgence, despite the fact that they have not been believing in the system. Because of many times in the past, you have snatching of ballot boxes and all of that. And we were happy because we're working with the system now that ballot boxes will not be snatched again. We work tirelessly as civil society organizations to look at the Electoral Act, where it went to the president the 7th time. You were here, were in your studio, watching before the signing, that memorial moment. Mm-hmm. I was in Channel Studio, to watch the signing. And I really praise the courage of the president finally for signing it, though it went to him several times. But there were many obstacles of the reasons why he didn't sign. If you remember, we were monitoring them and saying, look, if you don't sign this now, the election will be delayed. And we went on the street. We were frightened because we knew the setting, the timing for the election. And true to that fact, they delayed it. And that postponed the election for 1 week in terms of the timetable. And so for civil society, for someone to get up, we have the steering committee and even members of the civil society situation room, everybody making their contributions. ActionAid, for example, was looking at the logistics because logistics had been a major problem. And so we went in with INEC, and we made sure that we don't do anything outside INEC. INEC, is this your problem? Can we work for it? And we go and drum out, proposals. We write proposals to development partners. Can you please help us fund this so that we can close this gap? And we tried. We worked with some staff of INEC tirelessly, and we brought logisticians together. All the SACO, the NACO, the National Association of Road Transport Owners, Nigerian Union of Road Transport Workers, maritime, workers, and a host of everybody, that the Army, the Navy, the police, everybody that controlled anything, lifting any item of, including the CBN, about elections. And so we had a formidable, framework that was developed, and then it was signed, which media also followed through, to publicize. And so when you come to that, that's ActionAid. And then you have NDI, different organizations, YAGA, CDD, PLAC, everybody working tirelessly. So all the members of civil society situation room, they come handy with what they can contribute. That's what makes, we are in an individual but the collective, we are a force. And therefore, opening the situation room during elections is for us to collate, to bring all the energies together, concerted, because they say the bigger the broom, the better it sweeps, the African broom. And so that's the distance. So when you wonder the person that made the statement, to say, that is your own opinion, I think Plaque, Clement, the past convener, also made a statement. He said, but we are together. INEC is speaking our mind. And others are asking, why is INEC not asking the man to leave? Instead of even asking him to apologize. And then you come, are you talking for INEC? And you see the press conference yesterday, you are seeing, people trying to defend INEC. Should I be defending INEC or defending my constituency? I have a constituency, and that's the Nigerian people. That's the vulnerable people, persons with disability, women, girls who are really bearing the burden of poverty and also the burden of the present day. So for someone who says that, you then wonder, you ask him, what is he contributing to the civil society situation room? He's not bringing anything.
So I am a little concerned, and I'm sure that is something that we can explore. You've spoken about the role that Action Aid played in trying to ensure that logistics was smooth, yet logistics was still a major challenge. In fact, one of the problems that INEC experienced or Nigerians witnessed on the morning of the elections was that materials did not get to the polling centers in good time. So tell me, or tell the Nigerians, how did the engagement yesterday with INEC go? What were your own expectations from that engagement, and what eventually would you say that you were able to achieve? I mean, by you, I mean CSOs were able to achieve with that engagement?
I think I was in the meeting briefly, so I will speak from the tone of where I wanted to actually see INEC, the officials, to know exactly, to hear them, what are they going to tell the civil society? And once I heard what the chairman said, I said, fine. They were not willing to talk about even the post-election. They want to talk about activities leading to the off-cycle election, which is holding in Imo, Bayelsa, and Kogi State. And
so that was what they wanted to talk about?
That's what they wanted to talk about. But he said briefly, in his introduction, the chairman, at least for one, said there was a cash trap. And we were asking that time, we say, has the central bank, who promised that they will give you enough money to move logistics, because logistics has to move with liquidity. And INEC declared that they had received money, that they had received enough money. But for us, if you have logistics, the cash trap, I didn't even know that Nigerians will go to the polling units because of the cash trap, that the colorization of the Naira, they call it a change of Naira or whatever, they redesign it. It's not redesigning, they just color the Naira. And then the
notes are still not available.
Exactly, and then they were not available. And so my point was that, I felt very strongly that INEC was ready for the election. But of course, when they realized what happened during the mock election, which they conducted, there were some things that they realized there. I don't know if we were able to correct that between the time of the mock and also the technicians, talked about not being ready, on that side. But if election is starting on Saturday and by Thursday you have not moved, and they could not move because of the cash trap.
And you knew that? I mean, like, Action Aid was privy to that?
We were privy. We opened the situation room. We had opened the situation room, and our radars were just going up. The moment we saw, they said, even those who were working in INEC before, they just told us, as at, midday, of Thursday, the central bank had not given them money. Materials had not moved from the central bank. And so the backup, we're checking with the regs and all of that. They had not gotten the money. And then moving to Friday, once you don't move on Thursday, you have lost the time. There is almost no way you can catch up. And that is the reason why, what we thought we were going to sort out, the Naira, this is something that you don't bear the pain of another. You don't take the heat for another person. You are an agency as INEC. We are not saying that the fault goes to INEC alone. If the central bank doesn't give you the money, you say it out. Tell Nigerians, this is where, so why are you covering somebody? That's what I feel, because that's why I say defend your own constituency and let others defend their own. But they came out to say they have been given the money. We talked to some reg. He said, talk to INEC chairman, who said they have given us the money. And so for logistics, there is no way that you can move, when the things had not gone to the wards or going to the local government, is not gone to rats, you know, by Friday morning, by afternoon of Friday, things were still moving.
So there's some things that you were privy to, and you knew that as a result of this, this is a problem. This is problematic already, and that there was no magic that was going to happen. Materials are going to get late. Yeah. But I'm interested again. I mean, I'm going to go back. Maybe I asked a two-in-one question to yesterday's meeting. Yeah. I mean, reports, a number of reports have come out. Civil society have, you know, published their own report. The European Union published their own report. A number of other observer groups have also published their own report, you know, with mixed reactions being received. But from your own engagements yesterday, you have already told us what INEC was hoping to engage on, which is the upcoming elections. But I'm sure, I mean, from what we saw in that report, that civil society wanted to talk about, and they did ask questions about what happened during the 2023 elections. Why was INEC so far short of what it said it was going to do and what it eventually did? So in that regard, would you say that the INEC chairman was forthcoming, or were you able to elicit responses from the leadership of INEC from that meeting?
No, when you start a meeting and somebody tells you, this is the way I want to go, he's the chairman of the commission. I already heard what I needed to hear in terms of, but at least for once, admitted that cash was a problem. You know, that was admitted. And that happened, you know, it's not only ActionAid. All of our members of the Nigerian Civil Society Situation Room sent out thousands of logisticians, and my colleagues challenged them yesterday. Why is a report coming out to say civil society organizations did not cover every polling unit? Are we supposed to cover every polling unit? Was media supposed to be in every polling unit? You take an example, we move to one place or the other, you take a sample. And then the accusation came out. He did not, the response was that there were glitches. There were glitches that happened with the IREV, you know, with the, beavers and so on and so forth, but that the case was in court. We wanted, as civil society organizations, we wanted INEC to pronounce more results. INEC is the one that is supposed to be pronouncing results, not the courts. You are given the right to conduct an election and to declare winners. And you make a pronouncement, people challenge you, say go to court. What does that mean? We had differences in terms of, you know, what was in the beavers, and, some results were online, and in some of those polling units, elections were not conducted. So you have reference point. It is INEC. The onus lies on INEC to say, okay, I have this result, but there is no election that went on here. And so the reports that were coming from the field, because what we used to do, the reason why we have walked this far and there wasn't disagreement until, you know, this election, was that while conducting the off-cycle election, while INEC was conducting and we were observing, each time there is any issue anywhere and we raise the radar, we have numbers to call. We're able to call and we get the responses. We get INEC already, you know, immediate response to the things that we complain. Security is an issue. But we also report, and the reports were being carried out. So it made us to have a lot of trust. And that is a trust. For us, it was like a serious betrayal, because we trusted you. You said you would do this. You didn't do it. And we say, okay, and let's explain. And what he said yesterday, though it was going the way, I know that, you know, some of the civil society organizations said it is okay. You know, some of the reports, civil society organizations, send your report. One of the terms, we have our terms with INEC. If you monitor an election, you submit your result, your report. At the end of the day, hard copy, electronic copy goes to INEC. Do we owe them that? That's a responsibility we feel. And that's between our, you know, those who are funding us as well. We have to give them the report, and you also have to give INEC. And this is the work. And INEC does not challenge. You know, they're talking of review. Yesterday they said they were going to review the elections, but they are asking us, submit your reports. We use your report to review. But I'm happy that many civil society organizations were able to ask questions yesterday and to say, no, we cannot move forward. You need to talk about this. And it's important.
Let's go to Lagos now. I understand my colleagues have a question or two.
Yes, thank you, Markwe. Good morning, Mrs. Obi. For me, I'm interested in, the unanimity of civil society organizations, or perhaps the lack of it. We recall from your last meeting during the presentation of the report on the 2023 elections, where you demanded that the INEC chairman apologize. There was a dissension from a member of a civil society organization. And reports suggest something to that effect also from yesterday's meeting, even though we saw one member demand some form of explanation as to what happened and the prosecution of some erring INEC officials. What exactly is responsible? What are you sensing, from members of the civil society community, particularly with the disagreement about the outcome and the assessment of INEC of the 2023 general election?
Thank you very much. The person that had a dissenting voice was Ezenwa. Ezenwa, I don't know where he monitored the election, during the 2023 general election. I think he said he went to Gwagwalada and he went to the FCT or somewhere. But he is just a member of the civil society organization, and his organization did not contribute anything to this year's election. And when he came out to say it is your own opinion, every other, sometimes when the media catches, they caught his own attention, but they did not take other people that responded after he responded. And so he contested even the convenership with me. I don't know if we have any disagreement. I don't speak for INEC. He wanted to talk for INEC, and you see the press conference that they had yesterday again, is that INEC is not at fault. I don't defend INEC. I cannot defend INEC. I'm not employed by INEC, and I will defend my own constituency. And so far, when you are looking at voices of civil society, some people can decide to couch their own languages. I don't couch any language. We have poverty in the land. We need to change our governance system. We need transparency and accountability. There is, corruption that has become a cancer. We are now looking at an election that should have been done in a transparent manner because of the technology we have now, and the winners declared, because as civil society, we have no agenda. Our own is do it transparently. Whoever wins, let that person be declared. So I do not understand his own. He needs to even, did he give any report? If he monitored the election, did he give any report to INEC? He didn't. Actioned it on his own, did his work, and submitted his own report. Right. And then collectively, at civil society, Nigerian Civil Society Situation Room, we had a massive deployment, and we were able to conduct our own elections, our own observation, and then we had the report and we sent it out. You can see Yaga submitted his own report, though they are in the collective, but they also submitted a report. Right. You have CDD submitted report. You have Plaque submitted. Everybody submit their reports. And so when there is a dissenting voice, you begin to wonder, okay, what is the need for you? Are you to defend INEC, or is INEC to defend itself? Let INEC speak for themselves. Well, Madam Obi, why do you become a spokesperson?
It really hurts. It really hurts, really, to see.
I just work directly.
Right. It hurts to see. They're meant to be dissenting voices anyway, but you'd expect that at least the civil society organizations would present a common front and not make it look like there's even division within, so that the cause that you're trying to champion will be successful. So just to be clear, are you still standing by that demand or that call to have the INEC chairman apologize? Or in fact, you said it should have been asking for a resignation. Do you still stand by that call? Some have said, well, the cases are in court. How about you allow that case or those cases to be exhausted before we now come to a conclusion? But do you still stand by that?
Okay, first I want to say that if you have about 90 civil society organizations and somebody who is not even making any cogent contribution says, I have a dissenting voice, does that now segregate us for those who want to have their own voices, I want you to know that, I have come a long way in terms of activism, over the years, or decades. And you will always have those who are anti-government. You will also have those who are pro-government or pro some organizations and so on and so forth. So when the voices come, don't take it as even a negative. Bring the voice out. Let's debate. In civil society, we do debate. So if you have a superior argument, bring it out and let's debate. We are evidence-based and we'll continue to pull that. In terms of, I'm not the one to even demand. Are Nigerians asking questions to the INEC chairman or the commission itself? They got billions of naira. And what we were asking them yesterday, some of my colleagues pulled it out. I've called severally that you went into the election with over 173,000 polling units. That's 173,606 polling units. That's for the general election, for the national presidential and the National Assembly election. How many polling units did you hold the election? We asked for audit because each of the polling units is marked by the personnel that has been paid for by the people of Nigeria. Should Nigerians be asking, is it only NLB that will be asking the questions? I think you as media too should be asking that question. Is it me is it from my mouth? You want to hear Professor Mahmoud resign because you are incompetent. He had the capacity, but what happened? Let me say the political class, if they held you down, did you make the Nigerian people know? Or are you going to write your own? You'll be writing your history, you'll be saying, you'll be keeping quiet for other people, you take the heat for other people. Take the heat for politicians, they are not your friends. As a Nigerian, should we stand upright and demand accountability? I demand accountability. I say for every kobo that was taken, it should be committed. Women are dying on the maternity death road. So a guy called me yesterday. He said, I don't have any work. My wife had a baby. In a general hospital, they have asked me to pay 350,000. If not, my wife cannot be released from the hospital. So people are dying on the maternity death road. Women are dying, children are dying, and then we are talking about, you spending billions that should have been set up, that would have built so many hospitals, and then you are not accounting for it. They should account for it. Everybody should go down to accountability. For every of that penny, it must be accounted for.
All right. Mr. Neobi, immediate past convener, Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room, thank you for coming in. We do hope that indeed everyone will stand to account for their own role in these elections and other things that they have to do. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And just before we go, news has it that the police has arrested 4 suspects in a plot to attack Atiku others in Yola. The statement says, police, this is a statement from the police force, from the Atiku Media Organization, saying that the public at 9:44 p.m. on Sunday, a man seeking to confirm the residence of His Excellency, Atiku Abubakar in Yola, was apprehended at the gate of the residence. The man was apprehended by security operatives. Upon further interrogation by the police, the suspect identified himself as 29-year-old Jibrila Mohammed and confessed to being a Boko Haram member from Damboa in Borno State. The suspect also informed the police that he and his colleagues, who were later arrested too, intended to attack organizations associated with Mr. Abubakar and some other sensitive locations. All 4 suspects have been handed over to the military authorities, and that we do hope that more of such elements or humans who are seeking to disturb the peace in our nation would be arrested and brought to book.
Indeed.
Tweet.
Well, we have quite a number of feedback here. Let's see if we can rush through them. Matthew Diary is talking about 2023 elections. It says, INEC promised Nigerians so much prior to the Nigeria 2023 presidential election. Unfortunately, same election umpire could not ensure the transparency of the process on election day. 2023 general election was the most prepared for materially with great human mobilization. Sadly, same scenario as witnessed in past elections played out, thereby undermining the integrity of the entire process.
The 10th House Legislative Agenda, the key agenda for our legislature at the point of national economic emergency should be to demonstrate a true reflection of the desperate yearning of the citizenry, activate a far-reaching constitutional process to drastically reduce the cost of governance. This done and done well will tackle so many of our political fights. Politicians will be converted from profiteering to sacrificial power seekers. Let's do the first things first. Dr. Simon Okechukwu Okoja speaks there.
Amen to that. Let's take this one from Festus Akimboiwa, and he says, regardless of what's on the 10th National Assembly agenda, what Nigerians want is effective legislation that is transparent and accountable. The 10th NAS must empower Nigerians to engage in effective advocacy that will make our legislators more responsive.
Law for C with the streets. The 6-point legislative agenda of the National Assembly is all-encompassing. If tacitly and patriotically implemented, it should embody fiscal discipline and cutting down drastically on cost of governance. We should also note, quite importantly, that that legislative agenda is not ready just yet. It's not being finalized. So just to put that out there, the House of Representatives says that they will still do some sort of consultations before it is finally ready, just to put that caveat out there. But that's so much we can take on the program this morning. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm really excited about our nation, Nigeria. So wish you the very best. Have a great day. I'm Kaide Okikiolu.
Thank you for watching. I am Bukola Koka.
Whatever happens, keep your head up. Thank you. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf.
And I'm Neo Taigwe. Have a nice day.
The following is a paid presentation by ShopX TV. Are you worried about the safety and security of your home at night? Do you wish to know when intruders come close to your home? Or do you want to protect what matters to your family from anywhere at any time? Introducing the incredible Sidebulb HD Cam, the robotic 360-degree two-way torque camera with action tracking technology.
Surveillance in a light bulb. I was amazed at the 360-degree rotation. It gives me a full view of my house, and I can check in on my kids.